Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the July meeting of the UT Dallas Applied Project Management Forum. We thank you for coming. This is our 9th year, and our goal here is to have interesting speakers who are actually in the project management field working on various aspects of project management. Our speaker tonight is going to be Huma Sohrwardy, who's, as you see from her presentation, is going to be talking about project portfolio management implementation. And the key to the word there is implementation. I don't know how many of you have been through that process, but when you first read about it, as they say in the TV show Top Gear, when you read about it, they say, how hard can that be? Okay, until you actually try it. Okay, and there's a lot of things that you never thought that might happen. And so Huma's going to talk about some of her experiences on how she identified and overcame those challenges. So let me, without further ado then, let me turn it over to Huma. But before I do, those of you who are not familiar with this organization, we meet every other month on the third Tuesday of the month. And we have different speakers. If you're not on our mailing list, please talk to Teresa outside. We'd love to have you. We're sponsored by the UT Dallas Project Management Program, and they have, if you're interested in your MBA, you can get your MBA from UT Dallas with a project management concentration. There's also various project management certificates and courses and symposium and lots of project management educational offerings that I would recommend you look into. Okay, so now that I've recognized our sponsor, let me turn it over to Huma Sohrwardy.
Thank you, Kurt. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's tough getting away from work and coming and listening to PPM implementation presentations. I wanted to talk about PPM implementations, not just from a theoretical perspective, but my experiences, real life, in actually implementing them within an organization. Now, before I get started, am I blocking anyone's view if I stand here, other than David's? Okay. All right, so a bit about myself. Hi, come on in, grab some pizza. I'm a consultant with EDC Technologies. It's a small consulting firm basically focusing on program and project management methodologies and PPM. I'm currently working with my client is a healthcare software provider, and I'm basically helping them streamline their development processes. Before that, I was a senior director of PMO at MedAssets. I don't know how many of you have heard of MedAssets, but it's a healthcare service provider. So I've switched into a consulting role about 2 months ago. And based on my personal experience, today's presentation is really about the real-life challenges that I've come across when implementing PPM within the PMO organization. And my sort of challenges, I'm sure, are not unique to me or the organization I worked in. They're sort of things that most of you must have experienced or are experiencing within your organizations. So let's get started. Okay, the agenda for today is, and we've got about an hour for this presentation, so I'd like to do my talking for about 50 minutes and then keep 10 minutes at the end for questions that you may have. Okay, so we'll start off with a brief description of PPM, and I think that's important really to set the context for today's presentation. So I won't spend too much time on it. I know there's lots of theory and books on PPM out there. Then, in my mind, there's sort of 4 core components of PPM. I'll sort of briefly touch on them. Then I'll spend more time on the challenges that I've faced, and I'm sure some of you are also facing. Then I've got this roadmap that I'm proposing. It's just one roadmap to implement PPM. There are many others also. And then just a phased approach on how that roadmap can be implemented. Then very quickly, I'll touch on PPM tool selection and implementation, what I went through when I actually implemented that within the organization, and some of the things to watch out for. I'll very very briefly touch on that. Then have a summary at the end of what we talked about, and then we'll have Q&A at the end also. Okay, some housekeeping tips, please. Switch off your or mute your phones. Thank you. And even though I've said we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, by all means, please ask me questions in between. Let's just keep this discussion interactive. Okay, so let's quickly talk about portfolios, programs, and projects. And I've sort of taken the liberty of taking high-level descriptions from the PMI standard, so which makes a lot of sense. Anyway, so if you look at the hierarchy, so you have your portfolio, and within that you have your programs and projects, and you also have non-project work that you need to factor in, because obviously it influences the work that you're doing within your project portfolio. So per the PMI, the portfolio really is a collection of programs, projects, and other non-project work grouped together to meet corporate objectives, right? Very high-level definition. And then programs, in turn, are a group of related projects managed in a coordinated way to obtain benefits and control. So now we come into the benefit realization side of things. And projects are really just a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. So that's your tactical low-level delivery of these objectives that are actually planned or identified at an organization level. And all along, what you're doing is you're doing progressive elaboration. So you take your strategic objectives and you actually break them down into actions, which you can then translate into projects and get the work done. I mean, an example could be, say you're a manufacturing organization. Your very high-level strategic objective could be, hang on, we need to increase profit margins. Right? I mean, that's a very high-level strategic objective. So how do you actually, what does it mean? How do you actually deliver that? So your benefit, one of the benefits or the, out of that objective that are, those benefits are directly related to the objective could be you reduce your supply costs, or you increase your profit margins on the products that you sell, right? So that's basically a benefit. So what's the outcome of the benefit? Say for the reduce the supply cost, you could be looking at reducing your purchasing costs, right? And then an action coming out of that could be, okay, let's look at alternate supply sources. So that could be a project, which you can then track and map to your strategic objective. Again, that's part of portfolio management. Another sort of loose coupling with portfolio management is look at your stock portfolio, right? You have a portfolio of stocks. Here at that level, within your programs, you could be your asset classes there, and within your asset classes, you could have specific stocks. And your whole objective here is to buy stuff, you balance your portfolio and make sure it remains healthy, right, in these risky times. And at the end, outputs from a portfolio into these components is basically you pass on your strategic objectives and priorities, right? At a strategic level, what is it that you need to work on, the right work within the organization? And impact of changes. I mean, strategy may change. There could be market influences out there. You may have decided to take a certain path, but now you have to change it because, you know, strategic alignment is not there anymore. And then, of course, change request decisions. So you may have changes happening at the project level here that need to get approved before you re-baseline your portfolio. And the inputs into portfolios from these components are basically your performance reports and your change requests. So that, in a nutshell, is your project portfolio management. And then, of course, all of them compete for shared resources within the organization. That sort of puts constraints on the work that you do. And we'll talk in more detail about those. So following on from there, Portfolio management focuses on assuring that programs and projects are selected, prioritized, and staffed with respect to their alignment with organizational strategies. So that's the whole purpose of that, is make sure that whatever work you're doing, there's a purpose for that, and there are benefits that you identify and you actually make sure that they're delivered. Can I just offer a second? I was supposed to say that much earlier, but I haven't. Now, this presentation is, if you are starting out with implementing PPM within your organization, then yes, it tells you a lot about what to watch out for, what are the common sort of challenges that you face. If you are in the process of doing that, I'm sure you're facing some of the challenges I've highlighted here also. But if you are a practice practitioner, then take this presentation as a refresher 101. So let's move on. And what I wanted to add here was, I was reading PMI's Pulse of the Profession for 2012 the other day, and I don't know if any one of you have actually come across that. Okay, so it's a report that PMI publishes on a yearly basis, and you can get it from their website. And what they do is they basically go and survey professionals in the project, program, portfolio management field, and they get their feedback on, how things are doing, what are the trends, and get all their feedback together, and they sort of publish trends and some sort of benchmarks on how the disciplines are, what the trends in the discipline are and what are the changes from the previous year. So I was going through that and when I was putting this presentation together, and there's some trends related to portfolio management which I wanted to share with all of you today. And trends for 2012 for portfolio management are: tight economic conditions will continue to force the issue of good project portfolio management. So, yep, organizations make sense. Organizations need to make sure that whatever they're working on are closely aligned with what they need to do. And despite tight economic conditions, organizations have been and will continue to increase their focus on benefits realization. So there's focus on benefit realization, in addition to cost and time, as a project and program success metric. So, all of you are, I'm sure you're all familiar with the cost and the budget success metric for projects, programs. But now benefit realization is something that organizations are focusing on. And it's easier said than done, because it's tough trying to map benefits to your strategic objectives. And actually, even if you've done that, basically realizing them. So we'll look at that in more detail in later slides. And another interesting comparison between 2010 and 2011 was, in 2011, 55% of organizations use portfolio management, and that's up 5% from 2010. So there is an increase. So when I actually read this, and I said, okay, so why is PPM adoption on the increase in tight economic times, right? I can understand the close alignment, but PPM itself requires resources and in terms of funding, labor. You need to have people to manage that for you. So, what made sense to me was, yes, looks like organizations do have the money. They're not spending, they're not investing as readily as they used to, but they're taking this opportunity to actually get their governance processes in place, getting, the discipline mature enough in the organization so when things improve, they can actually, they have a kickstart or a head start on what they need to do. So I'm going to pose this question out to you guys. Why do you think that this PPM is on the trend on these, given these tight economic sort of environment or conditions?
I think there's more control on the spending and the changes and things like that. I've worked on projects that are standalone. Currently, I'm doing one that is part of a program. There's governance meetings. There's a change control board. It's a lot more involved and a lot more eyes on it. And it seems like they need to be careful with their money and make sure that they're getting the benefits that they wanted. So I think that's why they tied all these projects together, and it makes sense.
To do that,
And we also
yes.
know what each other's doing, so some of ours are kind of related to each other.
Mhm.
So if one of us has an issue, sometimes it'll solve more than one.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a good enough reason. So organizations are getting ready, right? And they identify or they recognize the importance of, some level of portfolio management within the organizations.
Is that a real or perceived? Because portfolio management back in 2010 was not really a term that people used. I'm very confused what that was.
Yeah, and I mean, 20 organizations did use it, I suppose, but then every organization has a different level of portfolio management. It could be a spreadsheet that they keep of all their projects, or it could be fairly involved. So to answer your question, well, this is a study, this was specifically portfolio management that they were asked, I presumably in the report.
Changed definitions during that period of time as well, and people knew more about portfolio versus just, because there were matrix organizations back then who sort of talked about other things, but you just didn't call it portfolio management.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it could be just semantics. Absolutely. I mean, I look at agile development processes. Yes, but then organizations did a flavor of agile with iterative development many, many years ago. So yes, it's the same concept, but in a way, it's just you put a different brand on it and you brand it differently. Yes.
I think the key is the focus, because we can collect the similar sort of programs and projects together and focus on each and every portfolio being offered by the company.
Right.
So that's very important, and that saves a lot of cost and brings efficiency to the entire organization.
Absolutely. So it's more visibility on what's happening inside the organization, right? I mean, I sort of worked in an organization in Australia. It was an insurance company where they set up a PMO at a corporate PMO where they wanted to get an idea of what was actually happening inside the organization. And when they finally got this, just a list of projects and what they were trying to do, they found out that out of all so they got it from all the business units, out of the 200 odd projects that they had, they could actually cull 50 of them because they were overlaps or duplicates or what have you. So yes, you're right. So it's just visibility in what's happening. So move on. Okay, so I've identified 4 core sort of PPM components. There's demand management, obviously, and talk about them in a bit of detail later. Resource management, again. Delivery and execution, also, I mean, they're not directly tied with portfolio management, yet they're core component. There's tight coupling between delivery and execution and the overall portfolio. And then, of course, there's benefits management. Benefit management, I think, is pretty challenging. Trying to, I mean, I found it very challenging to actually trace the outcomes from projects to actually strategic objectives. And I'm not sure if people actually, you guys have faced similar challenges, but not saying that it can't be done, certainly is challenging, especially the realization part of it. Okay, so in a nutshell, so how they link together is you have your demand. These could be coming out of your annual planning, your ad hoc requests, basically based on your strategic objectives. So this box here, the large box, is really PPM. So the first thing you do is you do your review, selection, and prioritization. This is typically a function of a review board. Then there's resource management and financial management. They feed into the selection processes. These are key constraints or things that people have to look out for. And then once you do select your what you need to do within your portfolio, you get to the work of actually getting the things done. So that's your execution and delivery. And you'll notice that there is still a relationship between all these components because there's data coming out of execution and delivery and feeding back into review and selection. And then once you basically, after you finish your execution and delivery, you actually deliver the benefits that you set out to deliver initially, or you stated were what you were expecting. And the benefits are not always delivered right straight away when a project or a program finishes. I mean, in some cases, if you're in the construction industry, you're constructing a building, yes, the minute it's done, it's there, you have a benefit, you move in and you start utilizing that space. But then there could be a process transformation project, right, where it takes time to get those benefits out. So the realization may happen straight away or it may take time. So that's a challenging piece. How do you then make sure that you basically track the realization sort of phase of these benefits? And then again, there's a link between the two. So from a demand perspective, from a selection review process, you may have started something, but now strategy has changed, so you need to stop it or put it on hold and refocus or reallocate your resources elsewhere. Or vice versa, execution and delivery. You may have a project that's happening and that's over schedule and over budget. So you need to have some sort of rebaselining done. Something else in your project has to give to get the work done. So again, these components are tied together. And I was going to say something else and I completely forgot, sorry. It'll come back. Any questions?
How do you balance the project, maybe you're going to get into this, but one of the challenges we face is that the projects which will have a long-term benefit and then the projects will have a short-term benefit. And how do you get the right mix?
Okay, so again, that actually happens in your review, selection, prioritization, right? So there are many ways of reviewing and selecting projects. The way we did it, we had a weighted score and we had selection criteria, right? So your selection criteria, very basic ones, could be your return on investment. How high or low is it? Your risk profile, your technical complexity, and how closely they were aligned with the organizational sort of strategy, the alignment. And then you basically have a lot of these models that you can use to do your project selection at that end.
Does it go backwards, starting with the benefits and financial management and ends up with the demand?
Does it? Well, benefits then actually do feed into the demand. I mean, you could actually deliver a benefit, right? And you may identify opportunities that no one has thought of before, right? I mean, you could develop a product for, I don't know, from the top of my head, it could be a medical device or something, right, for helping people walk, and then you realize, hang on, you could not only use it when people have bad knees, you can even use them when they have injuries or what have you. It's an opportunity no one sort of thought of. So you could actually go back and it may spawn off more work on that. Yes, absolutely. But the trick is, when you get those benefits, how do you map them to that demand? Work backwards so that you can actually track how you're actually doing on what your benefit delivery and your realization. So that's the challenging piece. Okay, so demand management, so it's doing the right work, which is effective work, rather than doing work right. So you may have you may be, I don't know, say an IT shop, right? And you've got these fantastic processes in place to deliver products, but you're obviously working on the wrong products. And you need to then make sure that you're actually working on the right thing that meet your organization objectives. Alignment with the organization strategy, again, and funding and resource availability are key drivers and constraints here, and/or constraints, because if you don't have the funding you don't have the resources, skilled resources, I mean, you can balance your portfolio till the cows come home, but you need to factor all those constraints in your strategy.
But the funding and resource availability, based on my past experience, is to a large extent dependent on the commitment of the management.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, if that doesn't happen, you can have as much strategies and everything, organizational strategies. If management doesn't commit the funding and the resources for it, the project manager is the one who is going to struggle to commit against me with this project.
Yeah, and that's challenging because even though if you do have commitment, you know how senior management, everyone has their pet projects, right? And it's like, no, you've got to get the work done. It has to be done. And there are so many constraints on, deadlines or resources. But when you stand back and say, okay, as a portfolio manager, it's a challenging job, fine. If you want to reallocate your resources or get this work done in 6 months, then something has to give. And that something has to give question nobody likes, right? Because no, you have to do this and that. So I'm going to talk about some of these challenges, and it's all about communication and making people aware that yes, when you reprioritize the portfolio, then something has to give. And people need to be prepared for that. And then communication here again is key. Resource management, that's important. That's resource availability. That could be labor resources, funding, infrastructure. Infrastructure could be technical infrastructure. It could be organizational resources. I mean, you name it. I've lumped it all together in there. So this again is important because it does impact, has a direct impact on what you get done within your portfolio. Delivery and execution, centralized aggregate reporting. For executive dashboards, performance reporting, for example, schedule cost benefits. It all ties in. At a portfolio level, you're looking at the aggregate health of the parts within your organization, within your portfolio. Consistency in the delivery process, even though there is, I wouldn't say the delivery process is really a part of PPM, but it's a key component in that you have to have consistency in how you deliver, in how you track your health within these components, because then your reporting gets out of sync. Manage change to baselines. Okay, so yeah, there has to be robust change management processes in place. Change is, I mean, the minute you start a project, you should be ready for change as project managers or program managers or portfolio managers. So you need to have that you need to make sure that those processes are in there to help you manage that. Benefits management. Okay, identify, track, and monitor delivery of benefits. I would say in my experience, and I'll talk a bit about that later in more detail, but getting to a point where everything is transparent and seamless and you can easily map whatever you're delivering to benefits, it's challenging. And I don't think I've worked in an organization where it is transparent, easy, and seamless. It's always very challenging. In the end, it's like you put it in the very hard bucket. But again, it doesn't mean it can't be done. Rebaseline benefits per change in organizational strategy and new opportunities. That's part of portfolio management. Transition benefit delivery and accountability to the operations organization. This is really true when you have realization takes time to deliver. So even though from a project or a portfolio perspective, you've actually delivered the product, but then someone needs to be accountable to actually realize the benefits of that product. And that's part of benefits management too. So we've done the theoretical part. So now let's talk about some of the PPM challenges that I've faced. And I'm sure most of you or some of you are facing as well. Overall, looking at the 4 components, lack of senior management and key stakeholder support and buy-in. Now, when I wrote that bullet point, I said, okay, it sounds like as if I or someone I'm supposed to just go and sell the benefits of portfolio management to the C-level. No, what I mean here is typically, okay, let me step back. Typically, the need for portfolio management generally comes from senior management. I mean, these could be a CTO in an organization, a CFO. CTO, because technology lends itself to portfolio management, right? It's the way work is done in technology. CFOs, because they hold the purse strings and they want to make sure that the money is being spent and most value is gotten out of it. Or a CEO, they just want to streamline operations. So as a consultant, a PMO manager, or a governance person, or a portfolio manager, it's really your job to help that C-level person articulate or get buy-in from his or her peers. Lack of communication, upstream, downstream, sideways. And I've seen this. I used to manage a portfolio of 10 million, a capital portfolio of $10 million plus. And we had a portfolio review board, but I found that even though minutes were taken, decisions were distributed, there was always this lack of communication. And this could be upstream, downstream, sideways. I'll give you an example of a downstream thing. We had, this was with my life as a PMO director. So we had a portfolio review board that would meet every, I don't know, 3 months or so. And decisions were made. We had about 10 members in there, the C-level, senior executives, and we had a quorum. So, you know, the final decision was based on, okay, out of 10, 6 people had to agree on what needed to be done, obviously based on the selection criteria or the methodology that was being used. So, you know, there'd be people missing in that meeting, and then the decisions were made. The minutes usually took about a day to be distributed. So the CTO was very good. He would come and tell everybody, and then you would, you know, send the message out to everybody. You know, even the developers knew that the project that they'd been working on had been put on hold. So once it happened that the project was put on hold, and the business stakeholder didn't know, because he hadn't been advised. So the developer told him, oh, I'm being reassigned to another project. So it was like, I got this irate sort of phone call from that stakeholder saying, did IT decide to put that project on hold? So it's just an example. I mean, there's this delay in communication. I mean, the intent is there. Everyone has good intentions, but it's the delay. So maybe it's, you know, get buy-in from these people on the review board. First thing they'll do is they'll call up people who are impacted. Upstream, the organization again that I worked for, every year in the annual budgeting process, they actually put together an internal operating plan, which had all the strategic objectives and what the benefits and outcomes would be. And then the senior management would get together and they would say, okay, fine, to meet this business outcome, we're going to do XYZ projects, which were then put on, you know, everybody's roadmaps. So, and that was the end of that process. No one saw the operating plan till the end of, you know, the following year. So in that meantime, projects had been changed, project names had changed. So there had to be this upstream. So if you were working on a project or there was a change, you had to let that person managing that plan know. So again, the gaps there. Sideways, I mean, even the portfolio review board. I mean, if you weren't there, you didn't know, and then you took it personally. So lack of communication is a challenge. One way I can recommend is basically have informal sort of communication channels as well. Just walk up or pick up the phone and call people outside of your, you know, communication schedule. Do that, it's important. Demand management, another challenge, duplication of initiatives. I mean, I've been in a scenario where we've had a project review board, and it was, I would say, in the level of maturity, we were on a scale of 10, we were somewhere, say, on level 6, right? But There were duplicate initiatives, mainly because your scope of your project could be departmental and you don't know what the other department's doing. So it's probably a good idea to get, product managers from different departments in when you're reviewing your portfolio so they know what you're planning to do. Funding constraints. Again, you start your annual budgeting process. Everybody gets, a piece of the funding. Things change, and then it's like people don't like it when you actually reallocate resources elsewhere. So again, it's all about communication. Weak strategic alignment. This is looking at where you have a low maturity level for PPM, so people just walking up and getting their work done. Again, this is really on the low maturity level.
I have a question
Yeah.
on that last slide.
Sure. Yeah.
On your top issue there, the overall lack of senior management C-level support and buy-in, do you have any tips or anything an example of something that you've done that helped overcome that absent support that we all often face with that C-level?
Okay, so the approach that we took was, especially when it came to, we kept a spreadsheet, right? And it's very important for the senior level to be able to basically visibly see what was happening, right, rather than just talking. So we just had a spreadsheet which said, okay, these are the things that are on the roadmap. These are the things that are in progress. The total funding for every initiative on the roadmap is, say, $10 million. So they had that figure there. And then the actual cost or whatever, the spend to date is so much. So this is where we are. We now utilized about 60% of what we set out to do. We're over budget. And then this is what is remaining, okay? And our sort of planned work is far more than the funding remaining. So it was very visible. What do you think we need to give? So here are some options that this, based on these priorities, we could actually stall this for next year and then get the work done. So keep it as visible as possible. We also used bubble charts. So it was like, okay, this is what's happening on the roadmap. So this was all manual. We started off with a very manual process. So based on the NPV of a project, the size of the bubble basically sort of changed. So that would tell them, okay, what is, the big chunk of work that we're doing? Are we even addressing it? How come there's more high NPV here on this project, but we're not even thinking of starting it yet? We're spending all these resources up front. So make it as visible as possible, because that sort of makes a lot of sense. We also had, so we based our portfolio on product lines. So every month, so we would have the review meeting every 3 months, but every month the product manager or the service line manager, whoever, would actually present a health of what was happening in that area. So this is what we set out to do. This is how much we have. These are the new opportunities that have come up. These are the constraints we need. So that you did a mini sort of portfolio management within. So when you met with the entire group every quarter, you could sort of have people who would have thought about it, talked about it themselves. So it made that process a lot easier.
And I believe the most important thing which the senior management people they look for is the benefits a project or portfolio is bringing. So when it comes to benefits, I mean, there could be several benefits, performance, and there could be speed of development and things like that. But the thing which is visible to the senior management is the cost. How much cost is being saved, how much optimization is possible, and how much profit or additional monetary benefit the entire portfolio is bringing. So I think on a regular basis, if we, as you said, of course, things has to be visible. So besides the NPV, etc., I think we should keep on demonstrating the benefit in terms of cost which the portfolio is bringing.
Absolutely, and that's where the governance comes in, right?
Yeah.
So you have phase gate reviews. right, of the entire project. You could do quarterly reviews. Okay, this is how we're doing. This is where benefit realization and tracking becomes important. So you can actually quantify, okay, so, we were going to increase sales by 10%, right? Are we there? But there's certain things that needed to be done to achieve that benefit. How are we tracking with those discrete sort of actions? So, yeah, a good point. Okay, delivery and with execution, inconsistent delivery and reporting processes, trust me, it makes a big difference. When you're especially trying to manage a portfolio, interdepartmental portfolio, where everybody has their own process, it can be challenging, especially from a reporting perspective. Naming perspective. I can give you an example which sounds simple, but trust me, it impacted people's expectations. So this was just very simple about semantics. This is semantics about product readiness. As far as IT was concerned, a product was ready when it was developed, tested, QA'd internally, and signed off by the user. As far as a senior manager was concerned, it was ready when development completed. So no one saw that, right? And it was basically when finger pointing started, hang on, you guys said you're going to deliver on end of January, and you haven't even, and you think it's going to take 2 more months. So then we figured out, hang on, people are not on the same page. So again, it helps to talk about it. And it's really, when you're setting up your portfolio reporting, just be very, very clear about what is it that you're reporting on, what are the expectations, explain it, even if it's very simple. You'd be surprised how people have different ideas. And it's just simple semantics. Lack of timely, accurate aggregate reporting, trying to get everybody's reporting timelines in sync. These are portfolio health indicators. Again, what are your KPI thresholds? Are they consistent throughout at your portfolio level or down at your program project level? Because this is at the portfolio level, you're doing aggregate reporting. So you don't want something red at a project level and green at a portfolio level. Or even if it's different, then people need to be aware of what the differences are and how to read these KPIs. Benefit delivery progress, going back to the question that your input. So it's hard doing that. So one way around that is to basically have these gate reviews at a portfolio level. Resource management, labor allocation. Who has had fun times with resource allocation conflicts? I mean, who uses spreadsheets in Microsoft Project to do their resource allocations? It is challenging, to say the least, and it's never accurate, because you may have, I've used different flavors. I've used a spreadsheet that you spend a lot of time updating, and the minute you save it and you distribute it and it's out of date. So you could be spending your entire day, entire life managing and keeping that up to date. I've used Microsoft Project, where you assign your resources when someone says, okay, level it now, and your 1-year roadmap turns into a 4-year roadmap, and then you're scrambling to get it back in that 1-year time span. So it is very challenging, but I found that using some sort of a tool helps. But then watch out for tools, because some tools automatically level resources if they're overutilized, and that's a pain too. But then there's some tools that highlight these over allocations, and that I think is, I prefer that way. That at least you can address them manually outside of the tool figuring out what needs to be done. So yeah, and I could see people waking up a bit when I talked about this. Guys, please keep it interactive. I don't want to bore everyone here. Forecasting resource needs. How many have you been asked by your senior management during the budgeting process to do a resource plan for the following year? Yeah. And it's just a snapshot in time because it changes. And have you ever tried to keep that in sync with changes?
The projects that I was involved in made it even more complicated because they were running over 3 to 4 years to be
Oh.
completed. So the forecasting resource needs were almost done on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, because I might have resources on my project that for a certain period of time are going to be leveling out. So I may have highly qualified people that we are already make available for the other project that is ramping up, so that if you really do, now comes the PPM challenges, the communication amongst project managers, resource allocation managers, and so on. All of those have to be people that know how to manage a project, because otherwise you put a whole thing on a spreadsheet,
Yes.
and you are asking for a fair result.
Right, and then it boils down to, okay, you go and tell your senior management, okay guys, something's got to give. We have demand, we don't have the supply to sort of deliver. And it's like, no, it needs to be done. And then, okay, forecast external labor out. And then, and if you don't, and then even if you do forecast your external labor out, or you create positions to fill those skilled sort of roles that you need, then there's no guarantee they'd be approved, right? But you still have to deliver. So one way around that is, I found was, okay, in your budgeting and estimation process, put in contingency in there for these things, because you're never 100% sure. It's always, I find it's challenging when you go back and tell people, okay guys, I know I got, say, $2 million to do this project, but hang on, this was based on the assumption that we'd get a skilled resource on board. Now that we haven't gotten approval to fill that role, we need funding to get an external sort of person on board. And that's where people, they tend to forget, and that's one of the challenges of PPM. It's just making the decision makers aware of these impacts. If this happens, then there's going to be an impact here, then you should be prepared to make that difficult decision of either putting something else on hold or reprioritizing your portfolio.
I think if you try to inject something,
Yeah, sure.
if you go back to number 15, slide 1 to 4.
Yeah.
All of those challenges here, in my view, come right back to lack of communication up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's actually the center point for all of this to work on.
Yeah. And that's right.
And there's one more thing that I want to mention. Where I came from, what we did was we as project managers were actually part of the entire process of those two charts here. We brought in the proposal stage, and during the whole management evaluation, updating, upstreams, downstreams, we were part of this. Actually, we were asked to sit in the planning stages, take a parenthesis of what we were doing, and sit in there to watch out. If somebody wants to take resources away from my project, when can I make them available?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it was not top-down management, it was a
Collaborative.
integrated kind of a decision-making process.
That's good.
Back to communication.
No, that's a good idea.
Also on a monthly basis, I think it's important that we analyze the deviation in terms of what was forecasted and what's the actual, which we do, of course, on a regular basis. And if there is a major deviation for any particular, because we have different portfolios, so for any deviation for any portfolio, we figure out the root causes and try to improve it and include it in the lesson learned for the entire portfolio.
Good. Okay. Benefits management, lack of realistic outcomes. Okay, so they need to be quantifiable, measurable. Mapping strategic benefits to portfolio components, again, it's challenging to say the least. I've been to a point where we got to a stage where the business case for a project actually had a reference that to the internal operating plan. So you could actually at a high level map the deliverables or the benefits from that project to that strategic intent. But to fully sort of track it as a process wasn't there. we also started using Agile for our development processes. So what we said was, okay, fine, then perhaps what we can do is maybe take some of the themes that we deliver in each project and try and map those to these strategic objectives at a high level, and just to make sure that just track whether we actually delivered. If not, what was it replaced by, and what the impact high level it made on the strategic objectives. Rebaseline and reset stakeholder expectations. Again, that's key. Okay, so we've got 10 more minutes. So let's quickly go through this implementation roadmap. And this is, like I said, this is how we did this. It makes sense to me, but again, it's just one approach. There are many others. First of all, ask yourself the question, do you really need a formal PPM process? I mean, it could be the organization may just be small people. They just have one product line and they're running only 5 or 6 projects, developing and enhancing that product. So they may not need a formal PPM sort of processes in place. It could just be a spreadsheet with, okay, this is what we plan to do, this is your budget, this is how we're tracking against it, and so on. I urge you, walk before you use this approach, the walk before you run. Do not take a big bite on implementing PPM. Just take small steps and make sure until you get on to the next one. Step 1, socialize it, communication, build awareness, get buy-in. Implement the framework. It could be core PPM process. This could be your selection process, the selection criteria and the methodology. This could tie into your financial approvals. This could tie into your, with the finance. Stabilize the processes. Again, develop familiarity. Go downstream, sideways, upstream. Get, once you have a process in place, communicate it. Get more people. Make it as transparent as possible. Gain acceptance. Automate PPM processes. Maybe you come to a stage where you say, okay, fine, we're comfortable now. We know how it's done. Let's look at automating it. I mean, there are many tools out there. Some may do the work for you, or you may have an internal solution that you've chosen to build. And then, of course, continuous improvement. Continue to improve and simplify these processes. And then I'm proposing a phased approach. Phase 1 would be, so you have these 2 steps in phase 1. So portfolio review board and process established, and review meetings commenced. So you've got people on board, you've got a portfolio of projects, you've got the selection methodology that you're going to be using sorted out, everybody agrees with it, and you have a review board in place and you have some processes. Then phase 2 would be process improvement extended to delivery and execution, and wider PPM established. Phase 3 would be PPM processes automated, near real-time reporting capabilities established. And phase 4 would be benefits realization process established. I mean, that extends out. I would say identify the benefits and track them, but the realization process, that's high maturity level. Okay, so phase 1 is all about quick wins. So here you socialize PPM and get buy-in. You define your portfolio scope. Is it interdepartmental? Is it departmental? Is it IT? Whatever makes sense. Define portfolio selection criteria methodology. Establish aggregate reporting guidelines and communicate downstream. Remember, it's your components inside a portfolio that give you information to do your aggregate health checks. Establish portfolio review board. Commence portfolio review board meetings. And develop portfolio of projects. Run a pilot. I mean, you may have this process. You say, okay, let's try it on a department or a group, and then fine-tune the process. And evaluate these results before you move on to the next stage. Phase 2 would be socialized PPM. I'm using that in every phase because you can't ever over communicate this. Define, improve, and implement related processes. This is program project management. If you already don't have them, I found that organizations tend to focus on these processes and then look up into portfolio management. It depends on where you are. It doesn't matter. Benefit identification, monitoring, and tracking. Get that happening. Change management, that's important. Phase 3 would be socialize again. Select and implement a PPM tool if you're at the point where you think it can help you with what you do. If needed, integrate with existing ERP and reporting packages. That's the financial side of it. And phase 4 is socialize PPM again. Improve and simplify existing processes. I find that when you actually implement a process, you go to the extreme end. You use all the best practices and what have you. But then once people get used to it, then you could probably simplify it and fast track it. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. This is portfolio selection. I mean, in my past life, I worked in one organization where we had full buy-in from finance. There's a quick turnaround time. You got a project approved by the review board, and within a 24-hour sort of time frame, the CFO would sign off on the capitalization approval, right? But then on the flip side, I worked in an organization where you could get the project approved, and work had to start yesterday, and the finance final approval would take weeks. So you had work happening, which was scary, and then you didn't have let's not talk about that. But again, the extremes. So make sure that these things are, fine-tuned. Delivery and execution, absolutely. Benefits management, focus on the realization and accountability. So typically it's finance that goes off and does the realization piece based on the business case. But as portfolio managers, identify people who are accountable to, first of all, after you've identified these benefits, people who are accountable to deliver them, right? And they need to be monitored and tracked at a portfolio level way past, things have been delivered over a 3-year period. A portfolio manager could, do these phase gate reviews, hold these people accountable to making sure that, what they set out to deliver is actually being delivered. I'll very quickly go through that. If you go through and select a PPM tool, identify your requirements first. Constraints, review the PPM market vendors. There are many out there. One suggestion, if you're thinking of going down that path, is if you're a large organization and you have access to Gartner research, they publish a PPM vendor quadrant report every year where they survey all these vendors, and you can basically use that as a base starting point, or just study the market. There's small vendors, large vendors. Lots of them have SaaS models, so it's less expensive than actually maintaining a system, but it definitely helps. You have consolidated, in my experience, it helped me getting visibility into resource utilization, into and automated reporting in terms of financial management and so on. Some of these even actually help you get costs on the total cost of ownership of a product line. Not just capital work, but also operational dollars spent on a product. Again, shortlist PPM vendors, create an evaluation task force, conduct requests for proposal, evaluate responses, conduct scenario-based demos. That's important, highly recommended. Have a scenario a full life cycle scenario of a PPM thing, and get these vendors to actually show you how work will be done. Evaluate the demo results and select the preferred vendor. Oops. And then, of course, start your SOW and do a pilot in one organization. So from an implementation perspective, again, it's very similar to any other software that you would implement. Define your rollout strategy, conduct roadshows, role-based training, conduct application configuration tasks, implement data integration points. I mean, a lot of these tools now integrate with your ERP systems. Rollout to plan, and very important, if you are going to look at a PPM tool, make sure that in your funding need, you identify a role for administration of that tool. Trust me, I've had my fingers burnt here because we didn't do that, and at some point I had one of my PMs doing part-time work on managing that tool, and which is because we ran out of funding. So make sure that you do have a resource in place to manage that tool that you have in place. It's a full-time job. Okay, so let's quickly summarize. For PPM to be successful, you have to have clear, timely, and transparent communication. Senior management stakeholder buy-in and support is key. Use a walk before you run approach. Don't implement everything. Test it out. See where you can improve, what works, what doesn't work for you. Benefit realization is becoming increasingly important. So you need to focus on that. And there's lots of material out there. Start off with a simple spreadsheet. Get the people together, the stakeholders, the sponsors, and have them tell you what the benefits are. And have people accountable for those outcomes. You have to have accountability in there. And some deadlines. So track it as as you would a schedule. This is the person who's going to be doing it, this is when it's going to be delivered, and how are you tracking. Have phase gate reviews at a portfolio level. And continuously improve. Q&A. Questions?
Okay, we probably have time for 2 or 3 questions. Does anybody want to ask one?
Yeah, with this global project teams, are there any additional challenges identified for different people? Where distances you don't see the other person?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Okay, the question was, thank you. So the question was with, in cases where you have global project teams, what are the additional challenges with PPM? In my mind, it would just be communication, making sure that it's again communication, making sure that whatever decisions are made are communicated out to those remote teams. When you say remote teams, are there more project teams that are remote? So then once a decision has been made, then these teams need to be aware of why they're doing something. And actually, now that you've raised that question, it's just not remote teams, it's local teams too that are local based. I found that it was, and my experience has been more in the IT sort of organizations. It's like you get your IT teams to work on a software tool that they need to deliver, right? Without them fully understanding what is the value of what they're developing to the organization. So what we started to do was, when a project was approved, was to get in the product owner or the product, the sponsor, to come and talk to those teams about, okay, this is what we're delivering. This is how your solution fits into the big picture at the organization level. So they had buy-in into it, and they understood why they were working on something. And very often you forget to do that. It's like, okay, these are requirements, now go build. So that's one way of working around that. But again, it's communication is key.
I see this example, in my view, is probably one of the most challenging, for the simple reason that if you have in different countries, different teams working on something, one of the weaknesses that I've seen that happens out here, if you don't show up periodically, to sit down with them and see what they're doing, where they stand, and allow them to ask questions, because what derails a project pretty quick that is in that scenario is when the other side of the world is starting to second guess. The guy is sleeping on this side. What did he mean, really? Now you get into language disconnects and so on. I've
Absolutely.
been in that scenario for many years, and I can tell you, I flew more often across the Atlantic to answer questions than I had ever expected.
Yes, so I mean, offshore teams have their own challenges, right? And then in the end, you end up spending more money, or whatever you're hoping to save, you sort of utilize in air travel or rework. But having said that, again, the issues that you're talking about are more at the project sort of domain. And yes, they do impact, and if your project's over budget or not on time, then yes, the overall health of your portfolio does get impacted. So you just need to probably be more aware of these challenges when you have these remote teams, and at a project level and a program level, just basically communicate more, travel more face-to-face meetings and stuff like that.
I have time for one more question. Yeah.
Several teams develop differently, so like Agile develops from the end backwards, and some develop from the front and go sideways, and so how do you manage that across the portfolio?
Again, so when we talked about delivery and execution processes, so it really doesn't matter whether you're using waterfall or agile for that matter. From a portfolio perspective, you just need to make sure that those are consistent, and when you approve a project, you decide, okay, this is a fairly sort of, we don't know a lot about this product. It is going to evolve, but we know that we need to start at this point. So agile basically makes more sense to use agile. Or it could be a process improvement project, or it could be something that you're automating, say a finance process. Then waterfall lends to it. You could use the waterfall approach, and that's fine. You can actually do that at the project level, decide which approach you're going to take. The point here is make sure that whatever process you use, they're consistent, right? They're consistently used. And secondly, portfolio is all about aggregate reporting, right? How are these projects doing from a cost perspective, from a schedule perspective, from a benefit realization perspective? So as long as you've actually sorted those things out and everybody's on the same page, your portfolio manager, your program manager, your project manager, and you've got processes to consistently track those, then should be good. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Huma's not going to run off immediately, so I'm sure
Yes.
she'll take some
Oh,
time.
absolutely.
Please let's thank her for a very important work.
Thank you.
I'd like to present her with a little gift, an official UT Dallas T-shirt.
Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
And
you.
thank you, everyone. Thanks. And thank you, UTD.